The unforgiving Wyoming winter clawed at the lone figure on horseback. Elias Vance, a man etched by grief and the harsh realities of the frontier, pulled his worn hat lower, shielding eyes that had seen too much. Days blurred into weeks since his wife, Sarah, was taken by the scarlet fever, leaving him with a hollow ache and a sprawling, desolate ranch. He was on his way back from town, the meager supplies barely enough to last the next few days, the wind a banshee's wail against his ears, whipping snow into his face. Each gust felt like a physical blow, a reminder of the emptiness that had settled in his chest. The sun, a pale distant smear behind the thick clouds, offered no warmth. Suddenly, a flicker of something out of place caught his eye. A small, still form huddled beneath a snow-laden pine, a darker lump against the vast white expanse. His heart, long dormant, gave a jolt, a surprising flicker of life in the numb expanse of his grief. Dismounting, he trudged through the drifts, his boots sinking deep with each laborious step. As he got closer, the shape resolved into a child, no older than 7, curled against the biting cold like a discarded rag doll. A crude, splintered sign, half buried in the snow, lay beside her. Elias knelt, his gloved hand brushing the snow away from the words scrawled in charcoal, the letters stark against the wood. "She's no one's anymore." A wave of icy dread, followed by a surge of desperate pity, washed over him. He gently touched the child's pale cheek. It was frigid, but a faint, almost imperceptible pulse fluttered beneath his fingers. He had to act fast. Her breath was shallow, almost imperceptible. "Little one," he murmured, his voice hoarse, unused to such softness. "Can you hear me?" There was no response, only a faint shiver. Carefully he scooped the feather-light body into his arms. Her clothes were thin, rags against the brutal cold. As he turned back to his horse, the blizzard intensified, the world dissolving into a swirling white void. He knew he was risking his own life, that another mouth to feed, another soul to care for, was a burden he wasn't sure he could bear. But leaving her was not an option. "Hold on, little one," he whispered, holding her close, shielding her as best he could from the biting wind. He spurred his horse through the whiteout, a silent, desperate prayer on his lips for the warmth of his distant, empty cabin. The old familiar scent of pine and wood smoke filled Elias's small cabin as he carefully laid the girl by the crackling fire. Her skin was deathly pale, lips tinged blue. He moved with a quiet urgency, stirring up the embers, the red glow illuminating his weathered face. He warmed water for a makeshift compress, his movements precise, practiced. Memories of Sarah, always so quick to mend and nurture, flickered in his mind. A painful echo in the silent room. He missed her steady hands, her comforting presence. He wrapped the girl in a thick wool blanket, then began to rub warmth back into her icy limbs, his rough hands surprisingly gentle. He found a small, intricately carved wooden bird clutched in her hand, its wings smooth from countless touches. It was the only possession she seemed to have, clutched tight as if it were a lifeline. Hours passed. The blizzard raged outside, its fury rattling the window panes, but inside, a fragile warmth began to bloom. The girl stirred, a soft whimper escaping her chapped lips. Elias offered her warm broth, spoonful by careful spoonful. "Easy now," he murmured, his voice a low rumble, "just a little." Her eyelids fluttered, then her eyes, a startling shade of blue, opened. Wide and wary, they darted around the rustic cabin like a cornered deer assessing its surroundings. She took in the mounted deer head above the mantel, the worn Bible resting beside it, the flickering fire casting dancing shadows. She didn't speak, only watched him, her gaze intense and searching. Elias, unaccustomed to such quiet vulnerability, felt an unfamiliar stir of protection. "You're safe here," he said, his voice gruffer than he intended. He cleared his throat. "My name's Elias. What's yours, little one?" She merely blinked, her gaze unwavering. He tried again, softening his tone. "Don't you have a name?" Still silence. He sighed, a slow release of breath. "All right, we'll figure it out." He kept a respectful distance, allowing her to adjust, hoping to coax a flicker of trust from her. As the night deepened, the snow still falling thick and fast, Elias sat by the fire, watching over her. The silence of his cabin, once a heavy weight of loneliness, was now subtly different, held in suspension by the unexpected presence of this small, silent stranger. Days turned into a quiet, almost domestic routine. The girl, who Elias eventually called Lily, a name that simply came to him, echoing the wild lilies that bloomed in the spring, remained mostly silent. Her small frame slowly regained its strength, a faint blush returning to her cheeks, but her eyes held a deep, unyielding sadness that spoke of a pain beyond her years. She ate what he offered, small portions devoured with a quiet hunger. She helped with small chores when prompted, stacking firewood or fetching water, her movements surprisingly nimble for her size. But she never initiated conversation, her world seemingly contained within herself. Elias found himself talking to her, filling the silence. He'd tell her about the ranch, the stubbornness of his old horse, the way the seasons changed the landscape. "This old cabin," he'd say, gesturing around, "it's seen a lot. Seen good times, hard times." He even spoke of Sarah, his voice growing softer, almost a whisper. "My wife, Sarah, she would have loved you. She had a way with children." He received no verbal response, but sometimes he caught her listening intently, her gaze fixed on him. He discovered she loved to draw with charcoal on scraps of paper, depicting sprawling landscapes and solitary figures, always with a faraway look in her eyes. The drawings were stark, beautiful, and deeply melancholic. He tried to understand her past. He knew the sign meant she was abandoned, but the why gnawed at him. Was she orphaned? Lost? "Where are your folks from, Lily?" he'd ask gently, but her face would only tighten, her eyes clouding over. He made discreet inquiries in the nearest town, a small collection of dusty buildings and wary faces. "Seen any lost children round these parts?" he'd ask the general store owner or the saloon keeper. No one had seen a child matching her description. The frontier was a harsh place, and such tragedies, while heartbreaking, were not uncommon. One evening, as a sudden gust of wind rattled the cabin, a sound like a distant gunshot, Lily flinched violently, dropping a wooden spoon with a clatter. For a fleeting moment, a raw, unadulterated fear flashed in her eyes before she retreated into her usual withdrawn state, her body rigid. Elias felt a pang of despair. He knew she carried a burden, something heavy and unspoken, a secret that bound her in silence. He was a cowboy, used to breaking wild horses and taming unruly land, not mending broken spirits. Yet a quiet, stubborn determination began to form within him. He wouldn't give up on her. Just as a fragile sense of normalcy began to settle, a stranger rode into Elias's isolated ranch. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery oranges and purples as a lone rider appeared on the ridge, silhouetted against the fading light. He was a lean man, with a hardened face and eyes that held a calculating glint, like a predator assessing its prey. He dismounted with an almost predatory grace. He introduced himself as Silas Blackwood, claiming to be a traveling prospector who'd lost his way, but Elias's instincts screamed otherwise. "Afternoon," Blackwood drawled, his voice oily smooth. "Didn't expect to find anyone out this far. Mind if I water my horse?" Elias, ever cautious, nodded slowly. "Help yourself." Blackwood's gaze lingered on Lily, who was helping Elias with the evening chores, carrying a small bucket of feed for the chickens. A strange, almost possessive expression flickered in his eyes, sending a cold shiver down Elias's spine. Lily, usually oblivious to outsiders, recoiled visibly, dropping the bucket with a clatter and hiding behind Elias's leg, her small hands clutching his trousers as if he were a shield. Blackwood offered a thin, unsettling smile. "Well now, what a pretty little thing. Yours?" he asked, the question loaded. Elias's jaw tightened. "She's with me." He kept his voice even, but his hand instinctively moved closer to the rifle propped by the door. Blackwood spun a plausible tale about losing his claim and needing a place to rest for the night, but his questions were too pointed, too specific about Lily's arrival and her background. "She just appeared," Blackwood mused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Out in this kind of weather? Remarkable." Elias, protective, offered vague answers, deflecting every probe. That night, a restless tension filled the cabin. Blackwood sat by the fire, pretending to clean his revolver, but his eyes constantly flickered towards Lily, who huddled closer to Elias than usual. Lily slept fitfully, whimpering in her sleep, her small body trembling. Elias stayed awake, watching the shadows dance on the walls, listening to the creaks of the cabin and the distant howl of coyotes. He knew, with an unsettling certainty, that Blackwood was not who he claimed to be, and that his presence was directly connected to Lily. The quiet, wounded girl in his care was more than just a discarded child. She was somehow entangled in a past he was yet to uncover, a past that was now knocking menacingly on his door. The morning brought a confrontation. Elias, rising before dawn, found Blackwood lurking near the barn, his demeanor no longer friendly, the thin veneer of civility stripped away. "We need to talk," Blackwood said, his voice flat, devoid of its earlier charm. "About the girl." "What about her?" Elias challenged, stepping forward, placing himself between Blackwood and the cabin. Blackwood finally dropped his pretense, his voice laced with menace. "She's my niece, my sister's brat. Came here looking for her. The family wants her back." His words rang hollow, a rehearsed lie. He spoke of a family inheritance, of land and money, and how Lily was an inconvenience, an obstacle to be removed. "There's a good sum involved, Vance," he sneered, a flicker of greed in his eyes. "Enough to make your life a lot easier if you just let her go." Lily, who had crept silently from the cabin, drawn by the raised voices, heard his words. Her small face was pale, her blue eyes wide with dawning horror. For the first time since her rescue, she spoke, her voice a small, trembling whisper, barely audible above the wind. He hurt Mama. He took everything." The dam broke. With Elias's gentle encouragement and the clear, terrifying threat of Blackwood's presence, Lily began to recount fragmented, halting memories of her parents, of a man like Blackwood, always lurking, always whispering, of her mother's illness, and how, in her weakness, Blackwood had tricked them, stolen their property, leaving them destitute. She described how her mother, desperate and dying, had sent her away with a neighbor, hoping to save her from Blackwood's clutches, only for the neighbor to abandon her when the journey became too hard. Elias's rage simmered, a slow burn that threatened to ignite. He understood now. Blackwood wasn't a guardian. He was a predator, trying to erase a witness and claim what wasn't his. The standoff was tense, the air thick with unspoken threats. Blackwood's hand twitched towards his sidearm. Elias, drawing on a strength he hadn't known he possessed since Sarah's death, stood his ground, his hand resting on the stock of his rifle. "She stays with me," Elias said, his voice low, firm, leaving no room for argument. "You ride out, and you don't come back. Ever." Blackwood, seeing the unwavering resolve in the widower's eyes, the quiet fury of a man who had nothing left to lose but a newfound purpose, finally relented. He muttered threats under his breath, his face contorted in a sneer, but he knew he was beaten. He mounted his horse and spurred it into a gallop, disappearing over the horizon, a dark shadow receding into the vastness of the plains. As his silhouette vanished, a profound silence fell. Elias knelt before Lily, taking her small, trembling hands in his large, calloused ones. "You're safe now, Lily," he said, his voice husky with emotion, a warmth spreading through his own chest. "You're not no one's anymore. You're with me." And in that moment, under the vast, clear sky of the frontier, a new chapter began for them both, forged in the crucible of loss and the surprising, tender warmth of an unexpected bond.